Good afternoon. There was a bit of controversy earlier this week over the publication of a book of Black British history. The brilliant book of Black British history by a Nigerian author, published by Bloomsbury. This claimed that Britain had always been a black country and that black people had built Stonehenge. Now, this produced a condemnation from GB News and various historians and archaeologists, stating that the claim that black people built Stonehenge was nonsense, which it is. Stonehenge. Some of the claims that black people have existed in British prehistory have a reasonable archaeological base in that they're based on Cheddar Man. When Cheddar Man's DNA was sampled and analysed a few years ago, it appeared that he had a dark complexion, and there was a mixture of surprise and delight over this, because for many people, for many liberals, it showed that black people also had a place within Britishness. Now, since then, some doubt has been cast on the accuracy of this reconstruction. One of the authors published a paper saying that in actual fact the reconstruction was wrong and you probably couldn't work out the Cheddar Man's skin colour. Now, and the claim about Stonehenge is simply flat wrong. As one of the articles by GB News said, it was created by Bronze Age white farmers, and I think these farmers came in with the Neolithic. They travelled up. They originated in Turkey. They travelled up through the Balkans and into Europe from one route, and also across Africa, and then up through Spain in another. This isn't controversial. This is settled science. Now, and it's a bit of historical appropriation, and I do wonder about this because black history is interesting in itself without trying to appropriate other people's history. If you look at the history of Africa, especially Africa south of Sahara, there are fascinating African civilizations like, Ethiopia, Meroe, Axum, the Swahili states, and then going on, you have the you have the Islamic civilizations of the African savannah and the city-states in West Africa. Really fascinating cultures with a fascinating history. Also, West Indian history is also really interesting, quite apart from the slave trade. After slavery, in the generation after slavery, black politicians were elected to these countries' legislatures to defend black interests against the planters. Fascinating, really fascinating, but unfortunately you don't hear about it over here. Now, underneath this, the claim that Stonehenge was built by black people, there is Afrocentrism. Now, Afrocentrism starts off with a controversial but reasonable claim that the Egyptians were black, and then talks about how they were the font et origo of Western civilization, which is very controversial indeed. You could talk about some Egyptian influences, certainly, but not to the point where Western civilization is entirely derived from ancient Egypt. And again, with the Afrocentrists, they push it into Black Africa as well, so that all the achievements Black Africans have ever done, it's all due to colonization by the ancient Egyptians. A lot of Afrocentrism derives from 19th century white authors. And the claim that Stonehenge was first built by Africans was it was put forward in 1881 by Gerald Massey, who, according to Stephen Howe's Afrocentrism, Mythical Past and Imagined Homes, Massey was a campaigner for both spiritualism and Christian socialism, possibly the model for George Eliot's Felix Holt the Radical. And his book of the Beginnings, 1881, claimed that prehistoric England had been settled by the ancient Egyptians, who built Stonehenge, as well as contributing many words to the English language. Also, the ancient Egyptians also apparently influenced the Hebrew, Assyrian, and the New Zealand Maori languages. The Maori language is Polynesian and distantly related to Indonesian. So that's completely wrong. Anyway, and it also takes off from David MacRitchie's Ancient and Modern Britons, published anonymously in 1884. Now, MacRitchie believed that the population of this island had originally been what he called melanochroi, mixtures of white Europeans and blacks like Aboriginal Australians. And the Aboriginal Australians had been the people like the Aboriginal Australians had been the original settlers of the British Isles. And he claimed that this had been reinforced by further black migrants, such as Black Huns, Moors, and Danes. And it was this Aboriginal melanochroi population and black population that had left all the dolmens and stone circles and tumuli lying about the British Isles. Now, this has been supplemented by Albert Churchward, who in his Origin and Evolution of the Human Race claimed that the Inuit were black, the Egyptians influenced Northern Europe, and the Chinese were descended from the Egyptians as well. I think the Chinese might have something to say about that, if you try to tell them. The Piltdown Man was a Nilotic Negro. Right. Not a hoax then. Piltdown Man is a notorious fraud using a human skull and an orangutan's jawbone. Right. And then there was Ahmed and Ibrahim Ali's little book, The Black Celts of 1993, which claimed that before the Celts colonised Britain and Ireland, the original settlers were again blacks, black Africans who came up through Spain to the British Isles, and they all came from Ethiopia. And and then there is another one, Indus Kamit Kush, who claims that the first Japanese, Vietnamese, Siamese, Malays, Greeks, Romans, Spanish, Britons, and Americans were all black. Now, if you're talking about the Americans, this is an extremely this is going to start to be extremely controversial, because obviously you're claiming that the first people in the Americas weren't the Native Americans who really have been dispossessed and forced off their ancestral lands, but blacks. A little while ago, there was an extremely stupid young black woman who made a TikTok video saying that the Native Americans were just as racist as whites because she couldn't convince them that black people were the original inhabitants of America. I can't think of anything more likely to produce a really nasty argument than to tell an indigenous American that his were not the first people in the country. Now, there's clearly a problem with all this because demonstrably false history is being retold as the truth, and more or less as a hidden truth, something that's been covered up. And it's being published. I mean, this kind of stuff has previously published by Afrocentric presses. The problem now is that when you have claims like that black people built Stonehenge, being published by mainstream publishers, and the same descent into pseudo-history has also been done by white supremacists. I mean, way back in 1978, one author in Paraguay said that the people's Aceh Indians were descended from the Vikings. In the 19th century, a German anthropologist looked at one of the nomadic black peoples in South Africa and said that they must have been descended from the Vandals, or the Germanic barbarians who eventually settled in North Africa. And others. I mean, with Afrocentrism, there's also a bizarre mysticism which says that black people are somehow more in touch through the melanin in the brain with cosmic forces and spiritual forces. And that reminds me of some of the claims made by the early German neo-pagan movements. One of them, I can't remember whether it was Lance from Liebenfels or Guido von List, claimed that the ancient Aryans had radio-telepathic organs, but had lost these through interbreeding with the subhumans. And it starts to come very, very, very close to some of the things that the more extreme Afrocentrists are saying about white inferiority and the cosmic ideas. So yes, I think these ideas are presented as though they're acceptable because they're part of black liberation and black self-esteem, and you can see why black people, British blacks, would want who have always lived here, see themselves as British, would want to see themselves, in British history. The problem is, is when there are ahistorical claims being made like this and pushed because it is somehow liberal and liberating. They aren't. It's just bad history. I realise this is a bit controversial, but thank you so much for listening.